the search is continuing for a submersible tourist vessel which was en route to the Titanic shipwreck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. British billionaire Hamish Harding, chairman of private plane firm Action Aviation, is understood to be one of the 5 people on board OceanGate Expeditions, which was reported overdue on Sunday evening. That was about 435 miles south of Newfoundland. Well, during a press conference, Rear Admiral John W. Morga of the US Coast Guard said they are doing everything they can to try and find the sub.
We were notified by the operator of the submersible vessel that it was overdue, and it had 5 persons on board the submersible. So we're working very closely at this point to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to locate the submersible and rescue those on board. The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod, in a water depth of roughly 13,000 feet. It is a remote area, and it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area, but we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board.
OceanGate has released a statement saying for some time we've been unable to establish communications with one of our submersible exploration vehicles, which is currently visiting the wreck site of the Titanic. Our entire focus is on the well-being of the crew, and every step possible is being taken to bring 5 crew members back safely. They add, we are deeply grateful for the urgent and extensive assistance we're receiving from multiple government agencies and deep-sea companies as we seek to re-establish contact with the submersible. We pray for the safe return of the crew and passengers, and we will provide updates as they are available. Joining us now is an oceanographer from the University of Southampton, Dr. Simon Boxall. Dr. Boxall, good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. In your studies, in your experience, how critical is this situation?
It's very critical. They're in a very difficult situation here. They're sitting in 4 kilometres, 13,000 feet of water. That's the limit of the sub's capability anyway. They're in a very deep part of the ocean. They're a long way from the coast as well, so getting any sort of rescue attempt to them is going to take time. And there are very few vessels that are capable of going to those sorts of depths. The other problem is there's no easy communication method for that sort of depth. You cannot communicate with things like radios and things underwater. They're reliant on a series of sort of sonic clicks. And that's assuming that the receiver they have on the submarine is actually working. They've not heard anything from the submarine. It's all very quiet. But as you said, time is getting short. They have enough oxygen to last them until Thursday.
And of course, we know obviously how long it took for us to discover Titanic, and the size compared to the submersible significant gives you an idea of how difficult this search is going to be. Tell us a little bit about what the ocean floor is like there, because it's my understanding there are lots of deep trenches that the submersible could be hiding in, and it would be very, very difficult to, as you say, not only find it but then recover it.
Well, we know how difficult it's been, impossible so far, to find MH370. That was sort of an intensive 1 year of searching. Now, we do know this location of this submarine more accurately than we did of MH370, which was lost in the Indian Ocean 5 or 6 years ago. So, we do know roughly where the submarine should be, but it's still looking at a very large area. And the submarine is mainly built of carbon fibre, which means that it doesn't have a particularly good magnetic signature. It's very difficult to find. The technology we need to find it is not necessarily on hand. So it's a question of getting that technology out there. They're beyond the reach of helicopters and things, so they are waiting for surface ships really to get to them to support them out there in their search.
Well, Doctor, that search, we know there are no communications. Communications have been lost. But the sub itself, it could be underwater. It could be on the surface, though, couldn't it?
If it was on the surface, they would have other communication. If they're on the surface, they would be able to use radios. And I'm assuming they have some form of radio communication for surface use. But if once it's below the surface, it could be at any depth. It could be 10 meters beneath the surface. It could be on 4 kilometers, 13,000 feet. So once it's below the surface, they will lose all radio communication. Now, also, the sub itself is sealed from the outside. They wouldn't be able to escape at those depths anyway. So this idea that they could sort of open a hatch and escape at 4 kilometers, you'd be crushed. And to be honest with you, at most depths, you'd be crushed. So unless they are very close to the surface, then they have a problem. If they're on the surface, there could be communication.
Lots of focus naturally on the British-born billionaire who's on board, Hamish Harding, and I understand he has a Guinness World Record for the longest duration at the bottom of the sea in the Mariana Trench, and I think he was down on the bottom of the floor for 4 hours and 15 minutes, so he's already exceeded his own record. What are the impacts on the human body if you are at these sorts of depths for prolonged periods? Because obviously there are issues when you come back up, but could they, if they were found, be okay at those sorts of depths for a long time?
Keep in mind that they're in air pressure. They're in a sort of a sealed submarine, so the pressure they're at is still going to be close to atmospheric pressure. So it's a bit like on an aircraft. You go in an aircraft, you are at slightly lower pressure than you would normally be, but when you land again, you haven't gone from a vacuum to sort of full atmospheric pressure. It's the same with one of these subs. You're at sort of atmospheric pressure in the submarine. So once you're at the surface, it's fine. You're looking at very, very small increase in pressure. So it's not like a diver coming up from, say, 50, 60 meters and then have to worry seriously about the bends. That's not the case in this case. They are at atmospheric pressure.
Doctor, I'm assuming, I may be presumptuous here, that you have been on board something like this or something similar to this. Isabel was saying this morning, even just talking about this makes her claustrophobic. What would conditions on board be like?
I have been on something quite as deep as this. The sort of thing I've been on, being sort of like a Michelin Man dive suit type thing, which will take you down a few hundred meters. But the sort of conditions are going to be cramped, very cramped. These things aren't designed for comfort; they're designed for adventure. It'll be hot, ironically, usually in one of these things. You would think of it as being cold, but they tend to be quite hot. And of course, you are in. They're taking the maximum number of people they can get into the submarine to optimum use of it. It's going to be crowded as well, and they are down there. These things are designed to be down there for a few hours at most, certainly not days. So they'll always carry additional oxygen. So if they do hit problems, they have that additional oxygen. But it's going to be worrying, and of course we're assuming they've got power with light. It could well be it's dark as well. We don't know what's gone wrong with this thing. That's the problem.
And forgive me for asking this, but it's a natural question. I mean, what sort of bathroom facilities would you have on a submersible like this? If you've got people who are in a very stressful, close... Right, OK.
You don't. There are no... There'd be sort of a bottles of beer and that sort of thing, but that will be it. There aren't... we are talking here about sort of being crammed in a very, very, very small area, very small space. The problem is you need to make it small because you need to withstand those very high pressures. The pressures of that depth we're talking about 400 atmospheres of depth. That's a phenomenal pressure.
Yeah. Professor, you are there in Southampton from where Titanic made its last maiden voyage. I'm from Belfast, where Titanic was built. The curse of this ship, it seems to live on.
No, not really. I mean, the Titanic story is one of tragedy. But as with all things, all tragedies have some good outcomes. And the Titanic brought in so many safety mechanisms we see now at sea for seafarers in terms of radio communication, in terms of protocols, in terms of sufficient life rafts, that sort of thing. So the Titanic was a tragedy disaster, but it led to all kinds of new safety things. The big problem we've got now is that going into the ocean into submersibles is a risky thing to do. If things go wrong, there are no backups, there are no support mechanisms when you're at those sorts of depths. And as I said, I think people assume we can send the Navy in. Naval submarines cannot reach the sort of depths that this thing can go to. They are literally scratching the surface. And we can't see the thing, we can't see through the water, we can't see it visually, we can't use radar. We are reliant very heavily on using a thing called side scan, and even that has to be towed at deep depths, and it's a very specialized piece of equipment. It's like an underwater radar using sound, but it's not a simple task at all.
Well, our thoughts and prayers with everybody on board. And professors, doctors, I really appreciate your analysis and your time this morning at such short notice on this. Thank you very much indeed.